Life Audio.
Hi, my name is Jeff King. I'm the president of Persecution.org and one of the world's leading experts on religious freedom. I focus on spiritual growth, religious freedom, and persecution around the globe. You're listening to Faith Under Fire. Welcome to Faith Under Fire. I'm Jeff King, president of International Christian Concern. Faith Under Fire is where we defend, define, and deepen your faith. Hey, today we're going to be talking to Andrew Brunson. If that name sounds familiar, that's because he was imprisoned in Turkey. His name became internationally known. He became somewhat of a pawn between Turkey and the United States in a wrestling match. It was absolutely fascinating. But the really fascinating thing is just this is a dear brother of the Lord, and what he was going through, what the Lord was using him for, and how he was being shaped through a very, very intense experience. So, Andrew, welcome. So excited to talk to you.
Thanks, Jeff. Glad to be with you.
Yeah. And we were saying before we turned the cameras on, I just remember years ago, we had both spoken at an event, and I can't remember the event, but we had both been speakers at an event, and it was not too long after your release. And I always wanted to get with you after that because you were very honest, and but it was very raw too. So I want to get into that, but first of all, tell us just a little bit of background. Why did you get into ministry in Turkey? What were you doing there? And then we're going to jump right into the arrest.
So let me just respond to what you said right now about it being very raw. I think when I first came out, my story is a little different now because I've begun to see much more of how God was involved in it. And I think for everyone who, as we each have our own story, and as we see God involved in the difficult times in our lives, it changes the way we view it, and it becomes redemptive. And so I've had time to reflect on it and see what was God doing.
Yeah, and
that has helped a lot. So my wife and I went to Turkey in 1993, and it still is the largest unevangelized country in the world. And so most Turks have never met a Christian in their lives, and most cities don't have any church or person there who can represent Jesus Christ in any way. So that's why we went there, and we were involved for a number of years in starting churches, especially. And after 23 years, doing our work very openly. We weren't secretive. We were out in the open. And a result of that is that there were threats over the years. There was some level of risk because of the openness of our ministry. But the point is that the authorities were very aware of what we were doing. After 23 years, then we were arrested and held together for a couple of weeks. And my wife was released. Then I started 2 years stretch in the Turkish prison system.
Oof. I just, I think it was 2 weeks ago, I was speaking in church, and I was talking about the experience of what it's like for pastors in Vietnam to go through prison. And then I just watched a video of a gentleman who was falsely accused and spent time in an Asian prison. And so suffice it to say, prison in Turkey is not like prison in the United States.
I think prison anywhere would be a difficult experience. There were some things that were especially difficult for me. So first of all, to summarize my prison time, the first year I broke very thoroughly, deeply, repeatedly. And the second year, God rebuilt my heart, my relationship with Him. Yeah. It wasn't an easy time. Every day was still very difficult, but there was a rebuilding of my relationship with Him that took place. Yeah. And so that I came out of that brokenness and emerged from prison stronger and with a different intimacy than I had before I went into prison. But that was first through some pretty severe breaking. Yeah. And the things that broke me were fear. Just fear overwhelmed me. And that leads to the release of a lot of stress hormones, which means that I can't sleep. Over time, the body begins to break down. And I was in solitary confinement for a time, and the isolation, the sleep deprivation are what really break break people down. So my body broke down physically. I lost like 50 pounds and was just kind of a mess. Then the panic attacks start to come because the body's natural tranquilizers get worn down by the stress hormones, and it's not in your mind primarily. It actually becomes a very physical thing where there's not much I can do to stop those panic attacks. Which when you combine those with despair, that can be pretty dangerous because you want to escape and you think there's no to escape that situation, and you have despair that there's no way out, and so that can become very dangerous. Also, the isolation was very difficult for me. So first solitary confinement, then I'm put into, after 50 days of solitary, I'm put into a high security prison, and I was no longer alone. I was in a prison cell with it's built for 8 people. There are 23 of us crammed in there, and it's 24/7. You don't leave the cell. So I'm isolated in many ways there. I'm not alone, but I'm isolated, especially by my faith. And that was the most difficult thing, that I was the only Christian. Everyone else was a very, very strong Muslim. I was kept in the cells. I was kept with strong Islamists from an Islamist movement the whole time. And so there was nobody to pray with me who could understand the issues I was dealing with theologically, the crisis in my relationship with God. And so the isolation spiritually was very difficult for me. And then there was the uncertainty. And I was in prison for 2 years, but I did not know it would be 2 years. I had 3 life sentences hanging over me. And so I did not know if I'd ever get out. And it's really the uncertainty that most, I think, was devouring me. Just, I don't know what's going to happen. There's nothing I have to look forward to where I say, yes, I can count the days down and I'll get out. It's like, I just don't know. And I didn't know I was going to be released until the very day I was released. That was very sudden and surprising. So all of those things together broke me. So the physical conditions in prison, that's not what bothered me the most. It's not knowing if I'd ever get out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll tell you what, I forgot to turn on a timer. I'm going to do that, but let's take a quick break for our sponsors, and we're going to be right back. All right, well, welcome back to Faith Under Fire. Andrew, let's back up a little bit, because we passed by, I unintentionally got you into really the depth of your experience, but let's go back. So just overview, what was life like? I've been in Turkey. I already know. What was life like as a pastor in Turkey, and an open one? So
I never really wanted to be a pastor. I'm really more of I like to start new things and starting. So we were involved in starting churches, and sometimes I had to pastor because we would start a church, and there was leadership involved in that. There was we really came to love Turkey. That's not why we went there. We actually didn't want to go there at the beginning. We were asked to go. But after a few years, we think that God put just some of his love for Turkey into our hearts. And this wasn't really love expressed so much on an emotional level as wanting to see the kingdom of God, the blessing of God come to the Turks.
Yeah.
So we became very committed to that. And we also had a grace from God, which was having a sense of certainty that this is where God wanted us. And so that helped us push through a lot of difficulties. There's a lot of turnover among the missionaries in Turkey because it's just it's a difficult place. I'm thinking of the first time that we had credible death threats. And receiving text messages, if you don't leave the country by Wednesday, we're going to kill you, and things like that. And we knew who was sending them, and they were credible threats. And we thought, wait, it would just be too easy to get rid of everyone if we all leave the first time there's a threat. And so the way we worked through it is we thought, we believe God wants us here, and I'm going to stay until God tells me to go. If he tells me to go, I'm on the next plane out of here.
Yeah.
But if not, then this is my assignment, and I have to stay for my assignment.
Yep.
And I'll trust that God will take care of us, unless he doesn't, because he may not. And
That's
if he
right.
doesn't, then I'll assume that it's because it will bring greater glory to him and some in his master plan that I may not understand. So we made a decision based on that to stay. And over the years, that really helped us. Now, it took us a while emotionally to catch up with that because there were threats, there were death threats, there were bomb threats over the years. One time a gunman came and, attacked our church. He shot at me. And so I don't want to be flippant about it. Those were emotionally difficult, but it's like we already had the decision made. We'd already worked through it. We stay until God tells us to go. And that made a big difference for us.
Yeah, and I can so relate to that. Walking through very, very difficult circumstances, but the Lord, first of all, if he calls you and then doesn't release you, and even specifically where he'll say, no, stay. I want you to stay on point here when the world's crashing all around you. And that can be a very difficult thing, but it anchors you. And it's like you said, and he does things, we're going to get into this later, but he does things to break us for a lot of reasons, which we're going to break down. But okay, so you're pastoring a very intense experience, very dangerous experience. And then any warning, what happens out of the blue in terms of the arrest?
So I don't want to exaggerate risk. There was a level of risk. Others who are doing the same kind of open work would also have threats. Yeah. But there was a level of risk, and we had no idea that. So we had counted the cost in some areas, perhaps naively, but prison was not one of them because no one had been put into prison.
Yeah, they get expelled is the typical.
Yes. And so there hadn't been, people may be held while they are being deported, but otherwise just to actually be put in prison with criminal charges, that had not happened to anyone in living memory. So that wasn't really one of the things that we had considered. Had I known that I was going to spend time in prison, I still would not have had the right mindset because I would have had a sense of, I think I would have had a sense of bravado, almost a sense of confidence. Like, hey, the heroes that I've read about, my heroes biographies, some of those who spent time in prison, the testimonies I've heard from people in the Chinese church. It's like, no, this is, it'll be difficult, but I can handle this.
And I am a man.
Because I had a naive, I think, view of how difficult suffering could be. Yeah. And I think many people in the United States do also, kind of like, persecution, bring it on. It's going to be, it's going to be good for us. And certainly good things can come out of it, but it's also very dangerous. Yeah. And not everyone makes it through. And so I would have had that sense of confidence, like, yes, it'll be difficult, but I'll have, I have a close personal walk with God. I'm confident of his presence with me. I've read biographies of people who suffered, but I don't see any internal struggle. It's just difficult, but there's not a crisis of faith in any way. Yeah. And and I'm also a relatively tough person. I thought of myself that way. I've been here for a number of years, and then I got to prison, and once I was put into solitary and my wife had been released, I started to fall to break pretty quickly. Yeah. And I was surprised by that. And what surprised me before, I told you the reasons why I broke, but the most difficult breaking was the spiritual. And this happened because, when the first day I'm put into solitary confinement and I say, God, as long as I have your presence, I can do anything. I can handle this. And I had really been focused for years on running after the presence of God, had encounters with God, and then that sense of presence was removed from me. Yep. And so for the entire time I was in prison, I felt like, wait, I'm in the dark. God has abandoned me, and this was so painful to me So I thought, hey, God, I thought I was your friend. What happened?
Yep.
and
I've been
and
your good servant. Why
yeah,
am I getting
and
this
I'm
treatment?
suffering because of you, for your sake.
Yes.
This is my most difficult time. I've already broken down in so many ways from,
Mm.
as I said, the isolation, the fear, the uncertainty. I'm really broken, and now I feel abandoned, and that broke me spiritually, and I went into crisis with God.
Yeah.
Even began to question His existence,
Yep.
and accuse Him, His character, of all kinds of things, and that really surprised me, and that is what really ultimately broke me, was the spiritual crisis.
Yeah, and we'll get into that more. And if I am smiling at all or chuckling, it's out of, yep, I understand. And, having been in persecution ministry for so
You
long.
understand it, but most people don't.
Yes.
And so I did not.
Yeah.
And so I just thought, hey, I'm the weakest person in the world.
Yeah.
And then I got out and I found out, wait, actually, there are Chinese and Iranians and
Of
North
course,
Koreans and others who have a similar story to mine, but that story is not told very often.
That's right. Well, and there's such a bias towards, selling a great story and writing a book, and and I think yours was very honest. But yeah, I just think there's a bias and a pressure. And so that does a disservice to believers, because like you're not prepared. It does a disservice to anybody who's going to endure intense suffering. And I used to think persecution, the suffering associated with persecution, was so different. But in the end, now I've watched friends go through, terminal cancer diagnoses and different things. And everything you're describing is deep, intense suffering and the feelings we go through. What happened, God? I was your good servant. Where are you? Feeling abandoned, into the darkness, into the crisis, the storm, where everything gets washed away. So nothing strange about it. And what's so refreshing, again, is the honesty. That's what's drawn me to you. So talk about, your pastoring, or you're starting churches, however you want to phrase it. What happens with the arrest, and break us down right into that moment in the transition into prison?
So we were asked to come to the local police station. We thought it was to pick up a long-term visa, which we had applied for. And so I remember I'm rushing Noreen, let's get there quickly and get this over with, and rushing to the police station. And then they surprise us, say, you're being deported. There's an order to deport you. We're going to arrest you while that happens. They don't have to do that, but they could have just told us. And we actually were going somewhere. This was on a Friday. On the Monday, we had a trip. So we said, that's fine, we'll leave. We're leaving. We have a ticket to leave on Monday anyway. But no, they said they're going to arrest us. And then they held us for 2 weeks. The American, consul tried to come see us. They weren't allowed to. Lawyers weren't allowed to see us. And so we started to think there's something different going on here, because if they want to deport an American, usually, they'll do it in one day. And so there was something different. And after they just held us without any communication with anyone outside. And so after 2 weeks, they suddenly released Noreen. And then they transferred me that night to another detention center. And that's when I was put into solitary confinement.
Mm. And thereafter, there's court dates, the trial, and then you're accused, if I remember, you were accused of terrorism.
So I was held for 18 months before they put me on trial. And when they did put me on trial, it was for spying and for terrorism.
Yeah.
And all of this, of course, was false. And they knew it was. From very early on, all of the decisions about me were being made not at a local level. It wasn't just some overzealous prosecutor who made a mistake and would figure it out eventually. It was being made by the president of the country.
Yeah, you were a pawn. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think that, people sometimes ask, why did they do it? I think that at the beginning, it was intended to it's kind of like, let's hold on to someone and see what happens if we can leverage it in some way.
Yes.
But I think it was also very intentionally choosing me because it would intimidate other Christian workers there.
Yeah.
To self-deport. It would also be a signal to the Turkish believers. They're only, they're a very, very small minority.
Yeah.
But if we can do this to an American, we can do it to anybody. So it's an intimidation factor. After a time, it became a political issue where they're trying to get concessions from the U.S. But throughout, there's still the religious persecution involved. It wasn't only political, because when they did put me on trial, one of the main accusations was Christianization, where I'm doing psychological warfare through Christianization to basically divide the country.
Yes.
And I mean, literally divide it, not just create social divisions, but to break off a part of the country from Turkey. So the persecution, the religious persecution aspect of it was always there, and all the evidence I gave was actually our ministry.
Yeah. And how does that affect you? I'm trying to think of the emotional impact of being, why you went to Turkey. There's an internal witness. There's a compass you have internally of what you were doing. You were serving. You love these people. So what does it feel like when you're labeled a terrorist and a spy? Is there an emotional reaction to that?
Well, it was very annoying because I knew that they knew it wasn't true. Now, the majority of Turks don't know that. My cellmates don't know that.
Right.
And so, but the leaders who are going on television, this became a very high profile case. So it's on the front page of newspapers. It's constantly on television, and so they were making me into, in a sense, they were painting me as the bad Christian who's a traitor, who hates Turks, who's here to undermine the country, and you can't trust him. And they're using me to paint all of the Christians there, who are a very small minority, and there's a lot of animus toward Christians there anyway. And so they just said all kinds of terrible things about me. It's very annoying for me to see political leaders. I know they're lying. They know, they're lying. It's clear. But there's nothing I could do about it. There's also something else that I think is instructive for us in the U.S. is that, Jesus said that people would say that we're evil and say all kinds of lies about us and would hate us. And when we're accused, it's generally not going to be, we're accusing you because you love Jesus. Sometimes it is, but most of the time it's going to be, we're accusing you because you're evil. You're a threat to us. We need to silence you, marginalize you, lock you up, kill you, whatever. And we're presented as evil people. And it's very difficult to be misunderstood in that way. And I think that's, some of the pressure that will come to the States. It's too easy if they said, we're persecuting you because you're a holy, righteous person who loves God. Yeah. That we can wear that, we that would be an encouragement to me, actually. Yeah. But to be perceived as evil, someone who, is hurtful and hateful, then that's more difficult to deal with emotionally.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that is what usually happens.
In terms of the accusations?
Yes.
Yeah, of course.
They won't dignify us with we're doing this because
we're persecuting you.
Yeah.
Yeah, they don't come out and say we're attacking the church and we're persecuting you because of your faith, of course, yeah. And so is there any internal feelings of, they're putting a blanket of shame on you. Now, it's false, but there's that concern, like, the people don't know that. The Turkish people who I love, they don't know that. So does any of that affect you on that level?
No, not really, because I felt somewhat defiant. At the same time, I'm just kind of broken. And the only thing I wanted was to get out and be with my family, especially that first year. And the second year, in the rebuilding, I began to learn to suffer. I say I learned to suffer in prison. Yeah. To have a different mindset for suffering. And so, but the first year it was just I became a hate figure, very much a hate figure, and I didn't really care. I became just kind of used to it. Because all I wanted was my family. Call me what you want. I just want to be with my wife and my kids.
Yeah.
And the second year, I began to take on a bit more of, to actually understand. I have to say that the first couple of months, I'm confused. What's going on?
Yes.
And my mother actually helped in this. She said, well, you're being persecuted. So, oh, I know that to some degree, but whatever they're saying in the news and whatever excuses they're making, what's really driving this is persecution. It's an anti-Christian, a hatred of Christians, and it helped me intellectually to understand. It didn't make me feel good about it because I still have the crisis of, God, does it have to be this painful?
Does suffering have to be this bad?
But it helped me intellectually to understand, okay, this is, I don't like it. Why don't you let someone else go through it, some willing person? In time, as I look back now, it's obviously I'm looking back, different perspective. And I think that God was, it was a great, I wouldn't change what I went through, what I gained from it. It's like I paid a very high price for it. I would not want to go through it again, but there's something that it built in me, and that is very precious. So
I relate to that.
I don't regret it, but it was very difficult.
Yeah, totally get that. Would never want to do that again. Boy, was that costly. But what he was refining, and it is a fire, but what he's refining is precious and is only earned by some. So it's kind of like you're baptized by fire and you're taken into something that changes you. And assuming you get past that anger and that distrust and you get into that deeper level and there's that door of transformation he's trying to take you to. Side question, or back to, I'm just thinking of the micro too. So I've heard it, this same tactic where you're put in with radicals. I'm assuming that was purposeful in terms of your cellmates.
They accused me of being in two different terror organizations, what they call terror organizations. One of them is a Kurdish separatist group, and the other was called the Gulen movement, which really is an Islamist movement. It's a Turkish Islamist movement that is really a missionary society. They try to spread Islam around the world. They started schools in 170 countries around the world, giving their version of Turkish Islam. And so I wouldn't say they were radical in the sense of like jihadists with like that. But
strong fundamentalist.
Yeah, but they were, they weren't violent.
Right.
But they were very committed. Whatever else they were accused of, I think there were a lot of, they were labeled a terrorist organization, even though most of them are not violent at all, but they were all very, very committed to Islam. And so for me, that was being in that environment. I'm the only Christian, and there's, Islamic prayer, Islamic worship 24/7, because, they thought, how do we get out of this? They're all desperate to get out as well. It's by leaning into Islam more and practicing it more. Like they'd read somewhere, if you, for example, if you repeat a certain chapter of the Quran 5,000 times, then you'll get out of prison or something. So
my God.
There would be constant, chanting of the Quran and things like that. So, I had a in-depth, intense exposure to very strong Islam, basically.
Yeah.
And the difficulty for me in that was just that I was alone and didn't have another believer.
Yeah.
Just the environment was, for me, it was a dark environment.
Yeah, absolutely. And just a side comment. The irony of accusing you of being an Islamic fundamentalist as a terrorist in that way. So it's like, okay.
They knew that wasn't, the guys in my cell knew it wasn't true because they were part of that movement.
Yeah.
But then when President Trump asked for my release, they had a choice to make. Do we have a good relationship with Trump and release this guy, or do we double down? And one day later, it became clear. All of this propaganda began to come out on the media, and they had very high level government officials who came out and said that man is a terrorist. We have all the evidence, and
we're righteous in what we're doing.
All kinds of stuff started to come out where they accused me of being a CIA and a special forces officer who was there to foment basically civil war, revolution, Turkey, and all kinds of terrible things that started to come out. And then the people in my cell were no longer so sure about me, So it led to some real tension. And eventually I was moved, I think for my own protection, I was moved into maximum security prison.
Yeah, no, we don't need to get into this, but what an interesting lesson into how the press is used, how the press is typically an arm of the government, even in democracies, and how the press is used, for all kinds of purposes. So, but there's one to go after your enemies and to silence them, etc. Are there any verses you clung to during either the breaking time or the rebuilding time?
Well, there was one that was especially important in Isaiah 50:10. Where God is speaking to Israel in exile and says, "For the man who walks in darkness and has no light, let him trust in the name of his God and lean on him." And this was, I think that one of the things God was doing I think there was a removal of presence. It wasn't just, we can say God doesn't abandon us objectively, but I think there was an intentional removal of any way in which I experienced his presence or his love. And so one of the things God was teaching me is to stand in the dark, whatever my circumstances and whatever my emotions. So it's turning it more to an issue of will.
Standing on truth, versus your feelings,
And, God could have said to Israel, "Hey, I want to encourage you, the light is coming." And he didn't. He said, "You're going to be in darkness for a while. When you're in the dark, lean on me." And so that kind of became I had a difficult time with the concept of trust, with the idea of trust. I know it's very important to God that we trust him. But when people say to me, "Andrew, just trust God," what they're really communicating is, "Andrew, trust God. He's going to get you out of prison." And there's no Bible verse that says that.
That's right.
No, so I think when we're in a context of persecution, there are no guarantees of how things will end. And it's the uncertainty there that's very difficult. And I think God also often suspends general promises that we have in the Bible. He'll suspend them at least temporarily in the context of persecution because of what he's doing with persecution. And so there isn't really something I can hold on to and say, this verse applies to me right now.
Yes.
And so I had to, the idea of trust, I usually link it to an outcome. It's very difficult not to. I'm trusting God for, and I know we're supposed to trust the person and not for something, but usually they get mixed up, at least in my heart and in my head. And so I used this verse, became very important for me because I said, okay, I don't want to use the word trust because I'm very conflicted right now, but I can say, I believe you're a good leader, Jesus, for my life, and I'm going to lean into your leadership. That verse says, when you're in the dark, for the man who walks in darkness has no light, lean on me. So I'm saying, I don't know where you're going to take me. I don't know what kind of difficulties I'm going to go through. I have no guarantees of what I'll experience in this life. But I'm going to lean into you and into your leadership. And the second verse that was very important to me, as my favorite verse now, is 2 Timothy 4:18. Which Paul is in his final imprisonment. He's in a Roman dungeon. He's miserable, and he expects to be executed. And he says, "The Lord will rescue me from every evil deed and bring me safely into his heavenly kingdom." And I think that means we need to redefine what rescue and safety means, because he's in a dungeon. He's going to be executed, but I think he's talking about Jesus, the Lord will rescue. He will keep me from the spiritual harm that would keep me from going into his heavenly kingdom. He will protect my heart and bring me through all of those hardships. And the reason it's important to me is I look back and I see the breaking. I came very close to failure, and I was suicidal my first year.
Of course.
And I could not see God in anything I was going through. And now as I look back, I think, Jesus was shepherding my heart. I couldn't feel it. I couldn't see it. I was unaware, but he brought my heart through all of those hardships so that I came out still loving him.
Yeah.
And so, I think that verse, I still have it today because I don't know what other challenges, hardships I'm going to have. And then I say, I'm just leaning into you. And I'm going to trust that you will shepherd my heart through all the difficulties of life, even when I'm in the dark.
Yeah.
That you are committed to my heart, to taking me through.
Tell us the verse reference, the first one again.
Oh, Isaiah 50, verse 10.
All right. We're going to take another quick break for the sponsor. We will be right back. All right. Oh, my gosh. I just love what you shared. And I think about my mind is just, you see me nodding a lot again, because I'm just thinking about, I talk about these lessons all the time, and I know them personally, not from your circumstances, but I'm so appreciative of the way you're able to articulate this, because if people are listening, hardly any of them, I think, are going to go through persecution. We'll see what the trajectory is in our country, but it doesn't matter, because in America, our prisons are anxiety and depression and cancer and the loss of children. Look, all those are prisons, and no one understands, because everyone thinks all things work together for good means all things work together for my good. And there's truth to that, but they interpret that as, I won't endure suffering. And we can't get to, what I always say is, look, the Lord has a mission for you, and he has a destination for you, and he's trying to turn your soul into something, and you can't get there without suffering, is the way I say it. And so suffering is a door, but I think it's so important. And for people to listen to this and to understand, this isn't about persecution necessarily. It's about deep, deep suffering. And the Lord is trying to transform us. He's trying to teach us things. We're going to come through with scars, and come through even is questionable, because it doesn't mean we're going to come through here. You get a terminal diagnosis, there's not necessarily a miracle coming. Like you said, you have to trust in him, period, not for what you want. And that is a very, very deep and hard lesson. It makes me think of one of my favorite songs. It's called Held. People should look it up. And based on real circumstances where a young couple lost their young baby. And I think it's the chorus, it says that the Lord never promised us we wouldn't have nightmares. He just promised that we'd be held going through these things. And this is such a deep lesson. And I just love what, with basically your long reflection and looking back and your very intense experience, what you can now articulate. It's just fantastic.
Can I respond to that?
Absolutely.
Are we recording?
I will eventually stop talking. Go ahead.
I mean, are we recording?
We are, yeah.
Okay. So I think this whole area that you're talking about is what I would put into the area of offended heart. You know, the thing that almost knocked me out in prison was that my heart became offended toward God. I was disappointed in him. I was wounded in the relationship, and that led to being offended. And the offended heart is very dangerous. Jesus warns about it. He says, the love of many will grow cold. And if you look at it, he's talking to the people of God, and this is the offended heart that ends up leading to the love growing cold. And I think that it's something that we all deal with. So when I talk about my experience in prison, sometimes people come up to me afterwards and they tell me one of their difficulties, and then they'll stop and say, but, I'm not comparing, you were in prison. And I say, wait, hold on, because my tests were enough to knock me out of friendship with God, and your tests are enough to knock you out of friendship with God.
That's right.
We don't need to compare our tests. Right. Mine are enough for me, yours are enough for you. And what I learned is that, or I observed, is that we're tested in different ways, but the area of the heart that is tested is the same. So, I end up having all kinds of questions. God, do you really, I don't see your love. I don't believe that you're being faithful. I don't know that you're completely good. And, just.
You've abandoned me.
Yeah. And for me, it's the fear of life in prison, dying in prison in Turkey. For others, it may be, you mentioned terminal illness, or it can be living with intense physical pain and there's no relief. And it's not just the hardship of that, it's also, God, where are you in this? It's like you're silent. Or it can be, a broken relationship, a broken dream. Yeah. I've seen people who are faithful in ministry and their ministry falls apart. People who are very generous to the kingdom, and yet their business falls apart. And so I think everyone at some point in their life is going to go through a crisis where they feel like they've been abandoned by God. Yeah. And they say, where are you, God? Where are you? And so what I went through in prison, I think when I talk about it, I'm trying to encourage people, be careful of the offended heart. Yeah. Because it is so dangerous.
You give the devil a foothold. Yeah.
And if I can just summarize what I learned on this, it was, I had questions for God. I at some point realized he had questions for me. Andrew, are you going to love me when you don't see my love? Yeah. Are you going to be faithful when you don't see my faithfulness? And that's what he was asking me. And that's what he'll have the same questions for you when you're in your darkness. Yeah. No, you may not see my love and faithfulness, but are you going to be faithful to me? Are you going to love me? Even when you're confused, even when you feel abandoned. And I think that is also a test. And the way we respond to it determines our relationship with God.
Yeah, and I think I'm listening to what you're saying. I'm just, again, thinking to the average believer out there, and part of the message is don't ever believe, people who are saying God won't let you suffer. Well, I don't know what then he was doing with Jesus, or what all those things where he told us in Scripture where you are going to suffer. So that is a lie, and it puts you in a very precarious position, because most people are not telling believers what we're talking about, that it will come. I would say it's going to come, and you need to think about it beforehand. What is it like? How do I prepare my heart? So we just can't, life is dangerous. It's a broken world. We're broken. We're surrounded by the broken. That means we're going to go through intense heartache, and we will feel abandoned. It's almost every believer will go through this and feel this. And just to even, you can almost never get ready to the depth you need, but just to be forewarned, don't be surprised by the fiery trial you're going to go through. So
the challenge is to go through, and we come out, but to come out with the heart still tender toward God. Yeah. That is the real challenge.
And oftentimes that's even what happens. That's half the thing. It makes us more tender. And the whole point is that we cling to God more closely. And when that happens, this is the main problem with Christianity. If listen to this and tell me what you think, but this is the problem with humanity. And even with believers, as long as we are pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps, all we're offering to the world is the few little resources we have, and it's not enough. We're very little use to the world. But if we get filled up with him, he is the treasure. He is the transforming agent in this world, and he's looking to work through each one of us. And the only way, and to get out to the dead and the dying all around us. But if we're blocking the flow of his Spirit, we have very little to offer, and it's only when we get a full dose, a full flow of his river, that can go through us out to the dead and dying around us. That's when we're useful. And almost always, because of our inadequacies as human beings, we don't reach that stage without suffering, without intense pain.
So one of the things that we do is we focus on meeting with leaders and talking about heart issues. Yeah. That's one part of our ministry now. And I think that many people don't come out with a tender heart.
Yeah.
I think that, I felt when I got out of prison, I said to God, how could you put me at risk? That's how I felt. Like I almost didn't make it, spiritually. I almost, failed completely.
Yeah.
And if I'd made some decisions, if they'd gone the other way, I would have.
Yeah.
And I felt like, God, I feel like you put me in a very risky situation. And I felt like he spoke to me and said, Andrew, I trusted you with a difficult assignment. Like he expected from me that I would respond correctly because of the intimacy I'd built up with him.
Yeah.
But I've thought more about that actually I think that if we can talk about God and risk in the same sentence, I know some people react to it, but it's like God does take a risk when he allows us to be thrust into darkness. Mm-hmm. Because not everyone responds.
People do walk away.
In a good way. Some people give up. Some people, do what I almost did, which is let the offended heart knock us out. And some people, they'll come out of that. They're still sons of God. They're loved by God, but they're crippled spiritually.
Yeah.
And God can never use them in the same way. They're not as usable. And so I think this is part of the shaping of our hearts that we have to be so intentional about and careful about, because not everyone makes it through well. But if you do, then God can trust you with more. He say, this person loves me even in the dark. This person is faithful to me even when they don't understand, when they're confused. And that is so valuable to God. And I think that what happens is, what I learned is there's an intimacy that comes only with testing. That when you come through, and there are examples of this in the Bible, some of the heroes that we have, that they went through in times of darkness, and we think of Moses and Joseph in the dungeon, and David hiding out in caves, and it's like
on and on.
They would have thought, where are you, God? And we look at their stories and we know the ending. And so we say, yes, of course they went through that, but they didn't know the ending. And they endured with the same kind of questions and doubts that we have, because they're human just like we are. But they came out of it still faithful to God, and then they come into a deeper friendship with him. And so I think that if you're tested and remain faithful, even in the confusion and the darkness, you come out with a tested friendship that is very valuable to God, and a different intimacy. So
well said. My friend, where do people find your ministry and your writing?
What I would point people to first is there's a video series. It was recorded by Samaritan's Purse for us. Yeah. It's called Prepare to Stand. Ooh. And they're short videos, 15 minutes, and they're intended for small groups, Sunday schools, things like that. I talk about some of the things, some of the dangers when we're under pressure, and how we can guard against those dangers. And it really is from my prison experience. Some of the things I learned there. And the reason that I did this series is because it's free. It's just freely available in a number of places. Is because I think pressure is coming to the U.S.
Yep.
And I think right now there is maybe a sense of euphoria even.
Yeah, it's a respite, I think.
Among evangelicals, since the majority voted for President Trump.
Yeah.
And he is rolling back some things, some of the excesses of the last years. But I think this is a temporary, a delay in what's coming, because our culture is not going back to what it used to be. He can
That's
roll
right.
things back on one level, but our
Without
culture has
revival.
radically changed. The majority of people are now, especially at the elite level, leadership of institutions, are post-Christian and increasingly anti-Christian. And they're still going to be here in a few years. And I think we're going to see a wave of hostility that was already starting to grow in the previous years. I think we're going to see it crest. I think it's going to break on the church. And so my real concern is that most American believers are not aware of it and they're not prepared. And if you're not prepared, it's much more dangerous.
Amen. All right. And my friend, where can people find your ministry?
We don't say much about our ministry. We do have, it's called Wave Starters.
Okay.
So wavestarters.org. But because of my very negative high profile in the Muslim world, because that's where it's still working, we kind of keep it low profile. I mean, people can go to the website, it's out there, but we don't list all the things that we're doing.
Yeah, of course. Well, my friend, I so appreciate this time. It's one of my favorite, literally, podcasts ever. This is dead center to my heart and to my message, what I share. And again, we've been in persecution, so I kind of think this is the way it shapes you if you learn and you're listening. But anyways, we're going to do another show. I don't know if we can match this, but I so appreciate it. And everybody stick around. Be sure to watch for the second show. All right. God bless.
Life Audio.